So next up, I would like to introduce my colleague Meredith back onto the stage. She is going to be chairing a knockout panel tonight on organizing in tech. Make them welcome.
Thank you, Kate. And I'd like to welcome our panelists tonight. I have been looking forward to chairing this panel for months, which isn't usually something I say about chairing a panel. But these are some of my heroes. These are people who've been doing such exceptional work. And I'm honored to introduce Bhairavi Desai, who is the founder of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. Veena Dubal, a powerhouse, who is Associate Professor of Law at University of California, Hastings College of Law, and so much more. And Abdi, the Executive Director of the Awood Center in Minneapolis. All of these folks, in different ways, have been organizing and working with tech workers. And this panel is really here because we want to look at tech worker organizing beyond the headlines. There's a lot of focus on white-collar organizing. But this is going to look at the app-based drivers, the warehouse workers, and the people who have both carved the path and had some significant wins this year. So I want to open up the panel with a first question that I'd like each of you to answer, which is really just tell us a little bit more about your work and how you see it fitting into this broader pushback against tech and tech-enabled worker exploitation. And Abdi, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you. 4 years ago, Amazon moved to Minnesota, Twin Cities, and they opened 4 locations, and they intentionally and heavily recruited from East African community. They offered free busing from our neighborhoods to the warehouses, and everybody was happy, and they were expecting good, safe, and reliable jobs. Quickly, we learned that was not the case. Amazon jobs were really highly stressful. Workers were complaining about inhumane rate, which led a lot of injuries. We'd also led a lot of, in fear because workers were losing their jobs. They set a rate, and the rate made by set by the tech workers in Seattle. And if you are a tech worker in the audience, please know that you have tremendous power to help workers and to make the world a better place, and also to hold corporations accountable. So the rate was the key issue for warehouse workers, and that led a lot of termination because they have a rule: if your rate goes down 3 times a day, you are out, no matter how long you work there. That career really, if you are someone who have a family, and most of the immigrants in the community, they support their family members back home, that means next day you don't have a job. And that means many of them, they really debated, should I go to the bathroom, or should I really work hard to keep my really rate, to maintain my rate, so I can support my family here and back home. That was the situation that Amazon workers faced. And they had no other choice but to speak up, to fight back, and to organize. And they led organic workouts, and then they reached out to us. We provided technical support. But the real heroes of that story are the warehouse workers who really said, no, enough is enough. Amazon, we want you to treat us like humans, not like robots.
And Bhairavi, I'd love to put this question to you. How do you see your work with taxi drivers over the years, and now with taxi and app-based drivers, as playing into this larger tech movement?
Well, so we've had a really unique unity campaign in New York City. New York City has the biggest taxi and for hire vehicle industry in the entire continent. And we've worked to build a solidarity between yellow cab drivers, livery drivers, green cab drivers, corporate black car drivers, and Uber and Lyft and other app drivers. And so the first stage of our Unity campaign was winning a historic vehicle cap last year, which, last year was a really painful, was a really painful year because in the course of 12 months, we had seen 9 driver suicides in our industry. And the suicides were across the industry. There's a black car driver, livery drivers, app drivers, and yellow cab drivers. And so, because there's been such a tremendous race to the bottom, and so we fought for the vehicle cap, which we saw as a life-saving victory, and we fought to raise the rates by which app drivers are paid as the majority workers in this industry. Drivers have been on the front line of change for past 40 years. 40 years ago, when this economy really went into independent contractorship and kind of the original push into the gig economy, it was taxi drivers who went from being commissioned employees to independent contractors. We see ourselves on a similar front line today. Uber and Lyft spent more on lobbying in 2016 than Amazon, Walmart, and Microsoft combined. And so, the disparity, the economic inequality between the average, pay of an Uber driver compared to what the Uber CEO makes, it's 5,000%. So we know we're on the front lines of this economic shift that's going to lead to a race to the bottom, really cutting away of basic fundamental employment rights for millions of workers across this economy, and really, deepening that divide of economic inequality, which is such a stranglehold across our society. And so, like warehouse workers, we've been fighting back, and I think the uniqueness of our struggle in New York City is we recognize that our fight, it's with the bosses, it's not with fellow workers. And unless we band together, we're not going to win this fight.
Yes, it is, my friends. Veena, I would love to put that question to you. You've been so integral to the tech workers movement and done so much work behind the scenes for so many efforts. So, you can choose any number of ways that your work is fitting into this pushback.
So I started in this sort of world also through the taxi industry. After September 11th, I was struck that there were workers in the taxi industry that I was interacting with, members of my family, people that I knew, who were laboring for 12 hours a day, who were not even going home with as much money in their pockets as they left the house with. So they were actually going into debt. And it was an eye-opener for me. I thought, wow, how is it that in America you can work for 12 hours a day and go home in debt? I thought we had the minimum wage. It took me to law school. It led me to start a taxi worker organizing sort of center at a nonprofit in San Francisco. And I ultimately did my dissertation work on this independent contractor behemoth. How is it that this even exists? Where did it come from? And what can we do about it? Soon after I finished my dissertation, Uber and Lyft hit the streets of San Francisco, and the workers that I was doing research on and working alongside were at the very forefront of the fight against these companies. I don't think that anyone quite realized in that moment in 2012 what we were looking at, that we were really facing not just the dehumanization of thousands, millions of workers in San Francisco, but actually an exploitative business model that is independent contracting, where it met with the massification of app-based technology. We were seeing that exploitation spread all over the world, from the streets of San Francisco to the streets of Bombay. It happened very, very, very quickly. The small but mighty group of workers that I was working with at that time have been at the forefront of that fight since then, and we've since that crazy time now been at the forefront of a huge victory. California was the first state in the country to pass a new law, you might know it as AB 5, that makes it much more clear that gig workers are employees for purposes of state law.
It's so major. Yeah. I want to turn back to you, Bhairavi, because you founded Taxi Workers Alliance in 1998, so way before these platform apps came onto the driving scene in like 2013, if I recall correctly. And so I would love to hear a bit about your experience of how did that change the industry, and how did that change your organizing, and what are the things we can learn from that firsthand experience as we all think about organizing in and around tech?
Well, I mean, we're very much a movement interrupted. You know, in 2012, the Taxi Workers Alliance in New York City had just won our biggest living wage campaign, where we were literally going to see a raise for driver incomes by about $10,000 to $20,000 within a year. We'd won this like historic portable health and benefits fund. We'd established new regulations on the taxi industry, you know, first time ever in this country. And we really believed that within the next few years, we were going to reach our ultimate goal of collective bargaining and full unionization, which has been our mission since we first started in '96 and then formed our organization in '98. And then came Uber and Lyft and Wall Street wealth, and everything just really changed. We saw the crisis of poverty begin to trickle in, especially in 2014. By 2016, you know, we saw that poverty spread to across the entire workforce of 100,000 professional drivers in New York City. We're talking about massive, you know, bankruptcies, foreclosures, evictions. I mean, we've had, you know, Uber and Lyft members who were, because they were victims to predatory leasing with the vehicle rates, who had been in homeless shelters for up to 6 months at a time, to, you know, drivers talking about food scarcity, to people just like living in their cars and sleeping at the airports overnight. We saw such high levels of depression and despair, and eventually we started to see the suicides. And so the work has changed so much because we've had to reimagine this industry, what it's going to look like. We've had to go from building really like ethnic-based solidarity in an industry where, you know, drivers come from 100 different countries, and we call ourselves the working class United Nations, you know. Back in '98, when we had our first historic strike in the city of taxi drivers, India and Pakistan, and 60% of drivers here are South Asian, you know, while we were out building solidarity on a strike, India and Pakistan, you know, wanted to test the nuclear bomb on each other. And so that's how much we had overcome, right? Now we had to go on to build that solidarity among sectors of workers in an industry that had all been pitted against each other. And we had to reimagine what this industry would look like when the yellow cab sector, which we had devoted our lifetime to organizing, was no longer the market dominant sector. And so now we had to organize a different subsector in order to raise the standards and have that be the new standard bearer. And so just on a policy level, practically speaking, everything really changed, you know? But, you know, and I know my colleagues up here can also bear witness to this. When in doubt, you let the workers lead. Workers always know. Yes, you know, workers know. They're out there building solidarity with each other, you know, at red lights or at restaurants or at hotel queues. They know that in order to prosper, they have to band together. And nobody knows the inside of an industry better than a worker. The bosses are far removed. They're never the people that really know their own industry. And so we came out with, you know, a political platform, but I have to tell you, last year, in 6 months, we had 26 street actions. And during that time, our goal was not to get the attention of the mayor or the council or anybody else. Our goal was to get the attention of drivers to not succumb to the despair. On every single e-blast and flyer we issued last year, we had a box with the suicide prevention hotline number. I could never have imagined in 23 years of organizing that we would have had to put down a suicide prevention hotline number on a flyer where you're also talking about policies and rallies. That's been at the heart of our labor struggle against the gig economy. It is so much rampant poverty and despair. You know, technology is just, it's been used as an excuse. The fundamental problem is the business model, not the technology. It's the business model that we're organizing to change.
Thank you, Bhairavi. I want to turn to you now, Abdi, and just talk a little bit about your organizing. I love the mantra, sort of trust workers. And you organize in a tight-knit community outside of Minneapolis. And you organize, you know, against a company that is like famously reluctant to make any concessions, to even nod their head at sort of, you know, the most basic ethical requirements. And you've, you know, won some pretty significant gains for workers. So can you talk a little bit about the community you're organizing and how you organized in a way that could win, you know, against Amazon?
Okay. Thank you. So to start with, organizing Amazon is really very difficult. And if you don't believe that, ask, you know, traditional labor unionists who will say, Amazon, forget it. But we, you know, we were very lucky to work with a very tight community. Most of them are East African, Somalis, and they were around 60% of the workforce in the warehouses. The working conditions were so inhumane that Amazon did most of the work for us to really organize the workers. But the real heroes here who really led the way all the way down are the workers. And when you search, always trust the workers. That's so true, and I agree with you 100%. Workers came to us and they said, we had enough. We will fight back. Can you help us? We said, yes, let's do this together. So we formed a small organizing day committee at you know, warehouse level. And we, at the beginning, we decided to really disrupt at the small scale level and see how far we can go. Mm-hmm. For example, one night we struck one section of a department for only 3 hours. Amazon estimated lost around $3 million for 3 hours only. And then workers realized, if we scale this up, we can also really force Amazon to listen to us. So after several actions, internal actions, Amazon decided to meet with the workers. And we facilitated that conversation quietly. At the beginning, we were just trying to address the real issue, like the rate, you know, providing culturally specific prayer space for the workers, especially for Muslim workers during Ramadan, where they really work 14 hours or 16 hours, but they cannot meet the demand of the rate. It's so increased and so intense. They said we need different and humane treatment. We were asking very basic things at the beginning. But Amazon, because they have so much money and they're so arrogant, they refused to listen at the beginning. But when we took real action and direct action, they came to the table. At the beginning, we said, okay, let's see where this goes. And we had the conversation quietly, but they were not willing to address the core issue, which is the rate, the productivity issue. They said, forget about the rate. We can talk about other issues, but the rate is our business model is based on really pushing the workers to the limits. We cannot change that. Anything else we can do? So we said, okay, if that's the case, we'll walk away from the table. And that's when, and actually workers voted for this resolution. We said, Amazon is not willing to fundamentally address the core issues. Should we continue negotiating with them, or should we walk away from the table? Workers decided to say, no, we will go back to our protest actions, and we will build power, so Amazon will force you to listen to us. And that's how the workers really forced Amazon to listen. And eventually, other labor unionists and community groups and progressive communities supported us. But what made the significant difference were the workers. And they're the real heroes, and many of them really took huge risk. I remember Safia, she's a mother of 4, and she had a breast cancer, and she was recovering from breast cancer, and her manager told her, you need to work faster and faster and faster, and she was able to do that. they fired her. And they said, you need to go out because you are not meeting your productivity rates. One of her co-workers, who was white, advocated for her and explained to the manager that Sophia is actually recovering from a cancer and she cannot work faster than what she's doing right now. And so stories like that inspired us to really support and fight. And I'm pretty happy to really say that Amazon workers inspire other workers across the nation to really take action. Just yesterday, on my way to this city, I was reading the news, and workers in California was protesting, and they said, we're doing this because workers in Minnesota did, and if they did it, we can do it. If first generation immigrant to the community who have been here for less than 2 years can do this, we can do it. So I think workers will win, but I want to say that warehouse workers only cannot win. We have to build cross-sector solidarity. One example, in one case that I would like to point out, we sent our leaders to Seattle to meet with the tech workers in Seattle. And tech workers came to our actions and protests and like our strike and on the Prime Day. So that was really fascinating. And when we see tech workers who are willing to support us and warehouse workers who are building solidarity with the tech workers make work happen. So we're so powerful and we can change the future of work in America and around the globe.
So this is a great transition to my question for Veena, because Veena, I know you really because you've kind of bridged these worlds, the white collar office worker in tech and the drivers and the warehouse workers who are also working, in and around tech. They're being mediated by tech, something like the rate or the platform just telling them what to do. And I would love, to hear your thoughts about how you connect these sort of seemingly different organizing efforts and your visions for solidarity and for building a shared understanding of the human costs and opportunities of these technologies.
It's a great question, and I should say, I have been doing research both on white-collar tech workers and blue-collar tech workers, but it has not been separate research. I was drawn into the white-collar tech worker movement because of how engaged the white-collar tech workers in the Bay Area are with the Uber and Lyft drivers, with the gig workers, with the more blue-collar workers. So this is not sort of a theoretical connection, but a real-life connection. I've seen Uber engineers, for example, come out, support Uber drivers in our May 9th Uber strike, which Bhairavi co-organized, on the streets of San Francisco in front of Uber headquarters, really putting their own jobs in jeopardy. I organized with a group of drivers in San Francisco called the Rideshare Drivers United. We have support from folks in the tech industry that come to our meetings every single week who offer and volunteer their time to grow solidarity between the white-collar and the blue-collar workers. And the question then is, well, why is this happening? 10 years ago when we were organizing in the taxi industry, we were never going to get someone from Lehman Brothers to come out and stand in front of city council with us and protest. And so, in my research, I asked this question, well, why do we see this happening? And the answers that I get from the folks on the ground are two things. One, the business models. Bhairavi alluded to the reality that this independent contractor business model that the gig economy is based on actually started in the taxi industry in the 1970s. Actually, sometimes even earlier than that. There are some cases where it happened in the late 1950s, right after Taft-Hartley. And tech workers, Meredith was part of this amazing Google walkout, which we haven't gotten a chance to talk about on this panel. But those tech workers, part of what they were protesting was the fissured workplace that they see in their own firms. The same independent contractor business model, the same sort of temp business model, the slothing off of employment responsibilities by corporations, the same thing that has been happening in the taxi industry, the same thing that has happened to Uber drivers, that is also happening internally within the white-collar tech force. And so I think that the folks that I've talked to have seen that similarity. They've also seen and shared similar concerns around the ethics of the tech industry. So Uber drivers are very concerned about their own privacy issues. They're concerned about the data that they're producing. They're concerned about their relationship to climate change and the fact that they're driving around constantly and what that might mean. And they share that with the white-collar tech workers. I interviewed a really amazing tech worker who, when I said to him, how do you choose between the ethical issues, the social justice issues, and the labor issues, the workplace issues? And he looked at me and he said, if we don't have power in the workplace, we will never have power over the ethical issues. Power in the workplace comes first. And that is why, that is why what Abdi is talking about, the intersectional, intersector organizing that we see happening in the Bay Area right now between people who are traditionally considered white-collar workers and people who are traditionally considered blue-collar workers is so powerful, because what is at stake is not just suicidal drivers. What much broader things are at stake. Surveillance capitalism is at stake. The climate is at stake. We're building power in the workplace and between workplaces to change so many things that are on the agenda for all of us when we think about what kind of world we envision.
Yes. So I'm going to close with 2 questions for each of you, and they're both equally important. So the first is, let's think about our positive future visions. In 5 years, if everything that you're working for in that timeline sort of happened, if the success was breathtaking, what does that look like, and how did we get there? And also, how can people support your efforts? Those are my 2. So maybe we can go down the line again and start with you, Abdi.
In 5 years in my industry, I would like to, Amazon workers and warehouse workers, and especially in workers in underserved communities, to have a voice at the workplace, to have a dignity, to have a safe, reliable jobs that they can really raise their families. And what can you do and what others can do? We're on front lines. We're fighting for all of us. We need your support. As you know, as an immigrant workers leader, we believe that we are really reviving the labor movement. We're on front lines, and we need your support. As the union density is going down, immigrant community and the organizing that's happening within the immigrant community is really what's energizing the labor movement. So I think from that angle, we need a lot of support, especially from the tech community, from funding-wise, all of that. Whatever you can do to support those who are in front lines, it will be greatly appreciated, and it's going to help you too.
Yeah.
Well, for us, most immediately, we've been working on a debt forgiveness campaign for actually yellow cab owner drivers. And, I say this because for us, taxi drivers have been among the first casualties of the gig economy, right? And so it's really important that while these different industries are going through a disruption and a change, it's really important that we protect the workers that are already in those sectors and industries, as these changes are happening. I think what we'd like to see broadly is certainly the reassertion of labor law in our country generally. Yeah. Which won't happen until we do much more to remove money from politics. We need to see a real democracy within our workplace in order to rebuild civil democracy. We're the same union that led the strike in 2017 at JFK Airport against the Trump Muslim ban. And I think really, reimagining, for us, reimagining a transportation network that really balances both private and public transportation, which, companies like Uber and Lyft have been really out to decimate, that realigns that balance between private and public transportation so that transportation does not become increasingly a privatized right, only for those with more means and money. And I think that in reimagining transportation policy, along with reasserting labor rights, to us are very much two sides of one coin.
I mean, I'm going to think big. On a political level, in the next 5 years, I'd like to see big tech broken up. I'd like to see Taft-Hartley repealed. And once we repeal Taft-Hartley and break up big tech, I'd like to see much more, not just worker democracy, but worker ownership in this particular sector of the economy. And I will say that the way that you get there is definitely not individually. It's not just with your vote. It's by building solidarity in your workplace and from your workplace to other workplaces. So call Bhairavi. Don't just donate money. Call Bhairavi, call Abdi. I mean, these are the these are my heroes, but they are literally the heroes of the movement right now. They are on the front lines doing the most amazing work. Definitely donate, but also support them as workers. And I think that everyone doing that, building solidarity individually, has the potential to really change things, even if things don't change politically.
Yes. I could just sit up here clapping. Thank you so much for that inspiring panel and for those beautiful closing thoughts.